folks, this is Chemistry Module 6 lecture, and I think probably review questions also. Today we're going to talk about stoichiometry and how we relate quantities of a substance in a chemical equation. And you'll see me a lot of times use BCE as the abbreviation for balanced chemical equation. Alright, so using stoichiometry means that we're going to use the coefficients that balance the equation to relate amounts. We've already had some experience in the last module using the coefficients in the balanced equation to relate atoms or molecules, right? So if I write the balanced equation for water, if I'm decomposing water, I would decompose it to hydrogen and oxygen, right? So I could say 2 molecules of water break down to 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 molecule of oxygen. Or I could say 2 moles of water break down to 2 moles of hydrogen and 1 mole of oxygen. That is using stoichiometry to relate the amounts in a balanced chemical equation. If I put in my phases, there's another trick that we can learn in this module. So we know when we did the electrolysis of water in the lab, the water was a liquid, right? But the 2 products were gases. I can wedge a gas. So hydrogen and oxygen are gases in their elemental form. And so today we're going to learn about Gay-Lussac's law. And Gay-Lussac's law says that stoichiometric coefficients, meaning this 2, and of course there's a 1 there. Stoichiometric coefficients relate volumes of gases where the substances being considered are gases. I cannot use Gay-Lussac's law when I'm dealing with liquid water. But I can say that not only if I produce 2 moles of hydrogen will I produce 1 mole of oxygen, I can also relate volume because they're both gases. I can't do that for the liquid, but I can say if I produced 2 liters of hydrogen, then I produced 1 liter of oxygen. I can relate volumes of gases using the coefficients of a balanced equation. This doesn't convert from moles to liters, it just tells me that if I produce, let's say, 4 liters of hydrogen, I'll produce 2 liters of oxygen. Right? I can relate those things. Okay, so we're going to look in the lab during class at several different reactions and how the 2 chemicals that are reactants in those combine in different proportions and how we can maximize our yield without having a lot of leftover chemicals of one or the other reactants. Right? This is especially important if one of our reactants or more are costly. Like if we're using silver nitrate, that's expensive. We want to make sure that we carefully calculate the amounts so that we get all of the product that we want without wasting in the lab. So stoichiometry helps us to not waste. Let's see. But in the lab, we can only measure on the scale in grams, right? I don't have a scale that measures in moles. And so if I know grams of something in the balanced equation, I can convert the grams that I know into moles and then use the amount of moles of something I know the mass of to relate to moles of the other reactants and products in the balanced equation, right? You can't just go from grams of one thing to grams of another thing though, right? If I know grams of one reactant or product, I can convert that to moles. Then I can use the stoichiometric coefficients to convert moles of one chemical to moles of another chemical. Then I convert that back to grams using the molar mass from the periodic table. So this step is important. We're going to convert from grams of one thing to moles of it, and then from moles of that to moles of another chemical, and then to grams of that chemical. So the stoichiometric coefficients bridge this gap right here between moles of one chemical and moles of another chemical. But we can't just convert grams of one thing to grams of another thing with our stoichiometric coefficients. That's a no-no. Alright, so we we've talked a little bit in class about molecular formulas and how to find their masses using the periodic table. But a molecular formula just tells you the number of each type of atom in a molecule, right? So if I want to write the molecular formula for hydrogen peroxide, the stuff in the brown bottle that you can clean a wound with or swish around in your mouth to whiten your teeth, hydrogen peroxide is H2O2. That means you have two hydrogens and two oxygens chemically bonded together. It's a covalent compound because both hydrogen and oxygen are nonmetals. So that's its molecular formula. But there's also an empirical formula, and an empirical formula just gives you a whole number ratio, right? And so I could reduce this, right? Even though it's true that every molecule has two hydrogen and two oxygen, this is the molecular formula. Then I could reduce. I could say my empirical formula is just one hydrogen and one oxygen. So the empirical formula is just a ratio, simplified down, right? For sugar, for glucose, I have C6H12O6, right? That would be the molecular formula. But I can reduce those, right? I could say there's one carbon for every two hydrogens and every one oxygen, and that would be the empirical formula, right? So the molecular formula tells us the truth, what's really in each molecule, and the empirical formula just gives us a ratio of the elements in a particular compound, right? Many sugars have this same ratio, right? If I had a sugar like C12H24O12, it would have the same empirical formula as glucose, but it would be a completely different molecule. So the empirical formula can only tell us ratios. It can't tell us what that molecule really looks like. And one of the key things that we started learning in the last module, but you've got to master it in this module, is using your periodic table to find the molar mass of a compound. All right, so we've definitely done this a little bit this year, but let's again take hydrogen peroxide. It's H2O2. If I want to find the molar mass of that, here we go. I've got my periodic table. I look at hydrogen, the mass of a hydrogen. Average hydrogen is 1.01, and there's two of those, right? And then the mass of oxygen here, 16.0. There's two of those. So if I add up the masses of all four atoms in this molecule, right? Oh wait, 1 plus 1 is not 1. There we go. And then 12, 13, 14, and then, okay, so I get 34.02 because the oxygens only go up to the 10th place. When I'm adding, I'm limited to keeping significance to the 10th place. So I would say that a hydrogen peroxide molecule has a mass of 34.0 atomic mass units. But basically we're done with atomic mass units. What I'm really interested in now is that a mole of hydrogen peroxide has a mass of 34.0 grams, right? So 34.0 grams and 1 mole of hydrogen peroxide. And keeping the chemical names written down is important, as we're going to use stoichiometry to convert now from one chemical to another. So that's like the briefest rundown of all the things that we're going to learn in this module. Let's look at our review questions to kind of get a better feel for the things that we're going to be doing. Number 1, make sure you do these, attempt them on your own, and then come back and check them with the video. Number 1 says, define stoichiometry and explain why it is such a useful tool for chemists. Well, stoichiometry allows us to relate quantities of substances in a chemical reaction using the coefficients that balance the equation. If you know one quantity in that balanced equation, even if you have 5 or 6 chemicals, if you just know one thing, you can use math to figure out everything with those balanced equations coefficients. So it makes figuring out how much stuff to use during a reaction really easy. Number 2, explain what a limiting reactant is and why it's important in stoichiometry. So all of our lab work is going to be about limiting reactants during this module. So a limiting reactant is just the thing that runs out first when a reaction is happening, right? So if I mix vinegar and baking soda, and I run out of vinegar first, then vinegar will be the limiting reactant. And if I run out of baking soda first, the reaction will stop because baking soda was the limiting reactant. The thing that runs out first is the limiting reactant. Probably you want your limiting reactant to be your more expensive reactant so that it definitely all gets used up. You don't want to waste the expensive stuff, right? So number 3, a chemist experiments with the following reaction. All right, so then hopefully you're looking at your paper and you've got this long chemical reaction. 14 HCl's, which is hydrochloric acid, plus K2Cr2O7. So K is potassium, Cr2O7 is dichromate. So this is potassium dichromate. And that's going to produce 2 KCl's. Can you name KCl? So K is potassium, Cl is chlorine. Potassium is a metal here, and chlorine is a nonmetal, so that is a ionic compound. And so if we name that, we don't need to use prefixes. So KCl is just potassium chloride. We replace the ene, chlorine, with an IDE ending, potassium chloride. And can you name this one? So this is chromium chloride. It's actually chromium 3 chloride, because chromium is a transition element. You have to use Roman numerals, even though it's an ionic compound as well, plus 3 chlorines and 7 waters. All right, so that's our reaction. So if the chemist adds 15 moles of hydrochloric acid to 1 mole of the potassium dichromate, what is the limiting reactant? All right, so if we look, we need 14 moles of hydrochloric acid for every 1 mole. We're adding just a little bit extra of the hydrochloric acid to the 1 mole of potassium dichromate, right? So we only need 14, we added 15, so we're gonna have some HCl left over. So that'll be our excess reactant. The one that's left over is the excess reactant. So the limiting reactant will run out first. So we're going to run out of potassium dichromate once we use up 14 moles of the HCl, but we have 15 moles of the HCl, so it won't run out. The potassium dichromate will run out first, the K2Cr2O7. All right, number 4 says, state Gay-Lussac's law and explain how it's used. So Gay-Lussac's law tells us the stoichiometric coefficients that balance the chemical equations relate volumes of substances in a chemical equation as long as the things that you're relating are all gases. It doesn't matter if there's some solid, aqueous, or liquid things in that chemical equation. It only matters that the things that are gases can be related by volume, not just by mole. Number 5, a chemist wants to perform the following reaction. So I'll just write it down. So this chemical reaction is CaCO3, which is calcium carbonate, which is a solid, plus 2 HCl, which is a gas. And remember, when we're using Gay-Lussac's law, we want to use just our gases. So I'll underline that one. Hopefully you can see that underline. I promise it's there. Yields CaCl2. Can you name CaCl2? So calcium is a metal, Cl is a nonmetal, so it'll be calcium chloride plus carbon dioxide gas. Gay-Lussac's law allows us to relate gases, and then water liquid. So we have 2 gases present in this. One is a reactant, HCl, one is a product, CO2. So which ones can we relate? Oh, with Gay-Lussac's law. Well, we could say for every 2 moles of HCl that are decomposed or reacted, I guess, we'll have 1 mole of carbon dioxide produced. Or, since they're both gases, Gay-Lussac's law tells us for every 2 liters of HCl, that are reacted to 1 liter of carbon dioxide gas will be produced. Number 6, if a stoichiometry problem gives you a quantity of substance in grams, what's the first thing you must do to solve the problem? So we're always going to convert grams to moles before we do anything else with our balanced chemical equations coefficients. Convert grams to moles. All right, number 7. What is the difference between molecular formulas and empirical formulas? So molecular formulas tell you how much of each type of atom is present in a molecule. It tells you the truth about the molecule. And an empirical formula gives you the most reduced down simple whole number ratio of atoms in a molecule. Number 8, which of the following are empirical formulas? So A is a sugar, C12H24O10. So all of those are even numbers, right? 12 carbon, 24 hydrogen, 10 oxygen are all even amounts. So I could reduce that. So it can't be an empirical formula. An empirical formula has to be all the way reduced. So that's a molecular formula. So it's a no. Number 8B is K2S2O3. Well, I can't reduce that any further because 3 is an odd number, a prime number. So K2S2O3 could be both a molecular and an empirical formula. And then C is CaN2O6. There's only 1 calcium in that, so it can't be reduced, and so it's an empirical formula also. So B and C for number 8 are the right answers. Number 9, a compound has a molecular formula of C14H21O7. C14H21O7. Right away I see all these guys are multiples of 7, right? 7 times 1, 7 times 2, 7 times 3. And it asks what is the empirical formula. So I'm just going to reduce this to get it. So 14 divided by 7 is 2, 21 divided by 7 is 3, and 7 divided by 7 is 1. So I don't have to put a subscript there. So the molecular formula is here. The empirical formula is C2H3O. All right, and then number 10. A compound has a molecular formula of H3PO4. H3PO4 is phosphoric acid. What is its empirical formula? Well, there's only 1 phosphorus in that molecular formula, so it can't be reduced. We can't split atoms in this class. And so H3PO4 is also the empirical formula because it's in its most reduced form already. So that is Module 6 review questions. So I'll be back with a new video on practice problems.